All right, brother. It is smoky. Western America is on fire. But we're dedicated. We are out here. Well, I mean, the only way I got my wife to let me stay out here for an hour with you is because the air quality is terrible. I said, well, we're going to be smoking cigars anyway, so what's the difference? And she didn't really have a response to that, so I kind of won that one.
I mean, it's the small victories, right?
It's the small victories.
Well, let's trudge on through this apocalypse.
Indeed.
And let's celebrate with some bourbon and a cigar. What do you say?
Let's do that.
Boom.
We are the Old Fashioned Dad podcast, looking to love dads through the person and work of Jesus Christ, entering into tough conversations on marriage, parenting, sex, religion, all while having a good whiskey.
So I woke up this morning.
Me too.
That's kind of neat. We both did that. What a cool thing.
Oh, there's more to your sentence. Sorry.
There is. I like the saucy side of Christian. I like that. Spicy. I thought I was on the red planet, Mars.
It feels a little that way.
For those of you who may or may not be keeping up with current events, we are here in Seattle, Pacific Northwest, living inside of a cigar at the moment.
It doesn't smell as good, though.
It does not smell as good. The air quality, I think, is ranked the worst in the world right now.
Yes, which is saying something considering how bad China is.
Yeah, China routinely grabs that distinct honor. But we have been able to take that because of the raging wildfires. So it actually looks like an overcast day today.
Yeah.
And
you know what it reminds me of?
Fall?
It reminds me of being in Iraq.
Oh.
Because in the summertime there, almost daily, there's sand and dust storms.
Oh, okay.
And it was really weird because
makes sense.
it would just kind of coast in. It wasn't like heavy winds. And so everything was just really still and dead. And sometimes the days would get like just red and really eerie looking. Kind of like this. Like I'm staring at the sun right now and it looks like a, eclipsed moon or something.
Yeah, it does.
It's super red. Can't see more than, 500 feet maybe.
It was a lot. The visibility was a lot less today. This morning, it's improved a little, but not much.
Yeah.
It is very eerie.
At least we're not in imminent danger of our houses burning down, which.
To my knowledge, no.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, no.
We're fortunate in that regard. It's just bad air quality. Hopefully, the wind moves it out soon. Let's make the air quality a little worse. Shall I light your cigar, sir?
Yeah, please do. Let's. It feels like I need to get some sanity inside my lungs here. Other than that, and all the general unrest, it's been a good week. It's been a long week for me, though.
Yeah.
Learning how to do more distilling stuff out at the old family orchard.
Has that been interesting but hard work, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a city boy,
Sure.
I'm not a farm guy.
City slicker.
Yeah, I like working with my hands, so there's a lot of that going on, and it's a nice change of pace as to, doing mental health work. But yeah, I mean, I got to learn how to operate heavy machinery and stuff that I've always kind of been a little bit intimidated by.
What kind of heavy machinery?
Like forklift.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, forklift.
I used to be a forklift driver.
I've driven a forklift once or twice, so I have the general idea.
Yeah.
And then obviously the stills themselves. So, and lots of propane. There's a lot of propane involved.
Really?
At least with the forklift.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, how's your week been?
It's felt long. Our son went back to school on Wednesday. We're pretty fortunate because he's in a small private school and they've got the means to be able to do in-person classes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have the option to do virtual, so some of the kids are doing that. Most, I think, are back. So he's been enjoying that, seeing his friends and being able to actually play. He had one day playing, and then Thursday the smoke rolled in. They've been having indoor recess because it's, for the record, we're recording this on September 12th. So,
yeah.
But so hopefully the smoke leaves soon because I'll be inside of my office and my eyes are just burning. I'm pro tip here, if you've got a good filter on your furnace, if you have a central heating, just kick that thing on, just the fan, not the heating element, to circulate the air in your house through the filter.
I don't know what we have on ours. That's a good question. That's a good pro tip.
Yeah, because I saw people like taping, air filters to the back of their fans. I'm like, why don't you just run your heating system? It has a filter in it. But I don't know if most heating filters, will filter out the small particulates of smoke. But
I'm not overly concerned about smoke inhalation. Maybe I should be, or whatever it is. I smoke cigars.
Sure. But once you remove it from your mouth, you're breathing clean air, typically. So. Yeah.
Hey, one thing that we didn't do at the beginning of this is say cheers, good to see you, and pour some bourbon. And we already had our cigar lit, so why don't we drink some bourbon?
Let's do that.
What do you say?
Yep.
What we are drinking today, I don't know why I haven't introduced this to you sooner, is a 1792 small batch bourbon from Bardstown, Kentucky.
It's a very classic looking bottle. And
it feels very kingly. Every time I see the top,
Yeah. Okay, the top, yeah.
Yeah, it just feels like a crown.
The text and style makes me feel like I need to be in like a speakeasy in the 20s. I like that. Yeah, it's gonna be flapper dress. Right
Yeah. I could see you pulling off the flapper dress real nice.
No one wants to see that.
No. I haven't tried this in a minute. I wanted to go with something that I think would complement a cigar. So
Cheers.
Clink, cheers. There we are.
That's good. Super caramely.
Yeah, that's nice, actually. They do make a couple of other expressions that I have a hard time finding up here. A full proof and a single barrel.
Okay.
And full proof just means like it's going to come out of the cask at like a higher alcohol volume.
Sure.
So, but this is a nice bottle. You can find it pretty much everywhere in America.
Okay.
Small batch.
Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey.
That's right.
46.85%. That's not precise enough for me.
We need one more digit in there, 48.65, maybe even
3 decimal points.
Yeah, there you go. So we're going to probably get into a topic that's really broad, fairly heavy, and probably is something that touches many, many people's lives. And we're not going to have super great answers or solutions to it, but we will offer our opinion and we will offer our thoughts and ideas, and hopefully they will be of value.
Hopefully encouraging and spur additional conversation and thought.
We certainly want them to be encouraging, and as always, we're gonna try and anchor this topic on Christ, because that's where all these topics, life issues, should be anchored. So we're going to try and look at this from the biblical lens. I think I've kind of narrowed down in thinking about all these episodes. You're the theology guy.
Am I?
Yeah, I think so.
I hope we're all in trouble.
Yeah, you're the theology guy, and I'm the psychology guy.
Okay.
And we both dabble in the other's respective area, but you're the theology guy.
Okay.
So, or at least that's what I'm telling you.
All right, I'm the theology guy. So when you
theology guy.
DM us and you're like, hey, Christian, theology guy, or good-looking guy would be the other Christian, so Christian B.
Yeah, Christian B is
The
the
style
kind of
guy.
the average psychology guy. That's go for that. So the topic that we decided, or I decided anyways, Christian's just kind of going for it with me.
I just show up.
Yeah. I kind of coax him here with bourbon and cigars, which
It works.
seems like pretty good bait.
It's very effective.
Yeah, is divorce. We're going to talk about divorce. And again, we're not going to approach it necessarily from a perspective of sin versus not sin, but we're going to try and look at it is from our experiences, potentially from a psychological stance, theological stance, and hopefully we're going to rest our hat on the person and work of Jesus Christ as it relates to this topic. So, Christian, does that sound concise enough?
Enough foreplay.
Enough foreplay.
Let's talk about divorce. Why did you want to talk about this topic?
honestly, it was the topic I chose because it felt like the most interesting, and I think that, you know, as we're talking to dads, parenting, you can't get into the topic of parenting without at least talking about divorce, and I think the statistics are really high for Americans in divorce.
Well, it depends on how you parse the statistics, because I've for years, not to say it's not a bad, not to say it's way too high, but for years, you know, I've always heard the 50%. 50% of
I wonder
marriages.
who you heard that from.
50% of marriages end in divorce, and I hear it all the time, like all over the place.
Yeah.
The problem with that statistic is it's wrong, because it's basically looking at, okay, we'll just use round numbers. 100,000 people were married this year, and there's 50,000 divorces. That's 50%.
Sure.
But that's ignoring the decades of people that are already married. So if you look at how many people are actually married versus how many people get divorced, the percentage is way lower.
Okay.
Now it's way higher than it should be, in my opinion, but it's not half.
How about we say this?
Okay.
Generationally, divorce rates are higher.
Yes, they're probably the highest they've ever been, but I don't have any numbers to back that up.
Yeah, I don't either. This is all anecdotal, but I don't think that anybody would necessarily argue with us that divorce rates are probably higher than they have been in previous generations. I had to sit down and think about, like, well, where do we go with this? What do we talk about? Mm-hmm. So one of the first thoughts that I've had is divorce is normalized in American culture. And what does that do to people? Well, first off, what do you think about, like, that idea divorce is normalized in American culture?
Yeah, no, I think it's not as social taboo like it used to be. There used to be this idea that, like, okay, you knock up your girlfriend, you get married, you do the right thing.
Shotgun wedding?
Right.
Yeah.
You do the right thing.
Yeah.
It used to be that as a society we saw marriage and love as a commitment, as action-based, not feeling-based. And so you got, society as a whole having moved to remove that stigma. So it's, incredibly common, but people don't typically judge you for it. There's a lot of people that have been divorced, multiple times because, well, I'm not going to say because there are all sorts of reasons, but generally speaking, I find that it's because people think of love and marriage not as a lifelong covenant, but as a feeling-based, as long as it benefits me, it makes me happy. As soon as it stops working for me, or I'm not, getting whatever it is that I think I need to be getting out of my marriage, I'm out. And that's tough, because, I think, we've talked about this before, and we, whether like it or not, end up adapting and being influenced by our culture. And so even within the church, divorce is not taboo. I don't remember the last time there was some sort of accountability or discipline, church discipline, because of divorce. The Bible's just as clear on the evils of divorce as it is homosexuality. Not really a distinction there as far as it being a sin, but we don't really look at it the same way, and I'd say that gay marriage and homosexuality, whatever, is increasingly is going that direction too, because of the societal pressure. But you can't really make the only way you can be okay with that as a Christian is ignoring Scripture.
Yeah, or just altering Scripture.
Right. When I was a young Padawan, when I was a young Christian, one of my mentors, he said a couple of things that really stuck with me. One of them is, when you're reading commentary on Scripture, beware of the commentary that's 10 times longer than the passage telling you why the passage doesn't mean what it says it means. Because there's plenty of theologians out there, or laymen, that'll try to explain away what Scripture very clearly teaches, because it doesn't work with their lifestyle or what they want to do or their preconceived worldview that's not based in Scripture. It's based in the world, and they're trying to fit God into their understanding of the world versus the world into their understanding of God.
Do you have like within your family any experience with divorce?
Yeah, my parents are divorced.
Yeah.
They stuck it out until I graduated high school, which I think was 14 years of marriage for them.
So you did you know at any point? I mean, I would assume it like as a teenager, like, hey, my parents aren't really functioning well.
No, I had no idea it broadsided me.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean, I think I'd moved out the house, the summer I graduated high school. I got a call from my mom, hey, father and I are getting divorced. And I didn't know what to say. Like, I didn't see it coming, had no idea. I remember I started crying, and I'm like, I don't know why I'm crying. It's just, I'm like, that really sucks.
Yeah.
And my sister's 4 years younger than me, so I think it hit her much harder because she was, going into high school.
Right.
And had to just, had to work about who she lived with and whose fault was it and who to blame and all that kind of stuff. And, without getting into the specifics of that, I mean, I think it was just kind of like my parents had gave up, and it's really sad because, I mean, because for a marriage to work, it takes both people, right? For it to not work, it only takes
Generally.
one, I mean, because if your spouse, for whatever reason, goes off the rails and decides, I don't want to be married, like, there's nothing you can do to fix that.
Right.
I mean, you could try to go counseling or use reason or logic
counseling.
or whatever, I'm just saying, like, we can only control ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. We're responsible for what God has given us as far as, things to steward and our calling in life. And if our spouse, isn't a Christian or stops listening to God or whatever, and does their own thing, like, you can't stop that. So, I mean, like, my heart goes out to that, My heart doesn't necessarily go out to people that just give up. Maybe that's just me being judgmental. I mean, I know there's probably dozens or hundreds of reasons people get divorced, but I mean...
Yeah, but and you raise an interesting point about the whole giving up thing. I don't know, I mean, out of all the people I've ever counseled through marital issues, I would say very, very few of them seem like they had anything to do with, like, adultery, or some
Sure.
form of abandonment.
Right. Which, I mean, tends to be a little more clear-cut. My husband cheated on me and ran off with whoever. Like, it's going to be hard to salvage.
Yeah. There's usually, underlying disagreement that happens for years.
Sure.
The narrative oftentimes is, like, I'm not happy with my wife or with my husband, and they don't make me happy, and they don't listen. That typically tends to be the narrative, and they live with that,
Right.
for years possibly, and
Sure. A lot of underlying long-term discontentment.
yeah,
Or
and
neglect of the marriage.
and it just goes unchecked, and
Right.
so eventually, I mean, if you live with that narrative as a married person for that a length of time, you never check in with anybody. It becomes kind of this echo chamber that you go, well, yeah, I'm kind of justified in my thinking,
Sure.
and it's time to call it quits. And honestly, a lot of the people that I have counseled on the matters of marriage and divorce, specifically divorce, they're also coming from a background of, well, their parents divorced. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, like, well, yeah, my parents divorced, but, everything turned out all right in the end.
Sure, or it's for the better, or some other
Yeah, and they're still
worldly
really
nonsense.
great
Right,
friends.
right.
That's some of
Sure.
the examples I've heard. They're still really great friends to this day.
Right.
Or the one that just drives me batty, that I hear from parents that are like husbands and wives that have kids that are actively pursuing possibly divorce, is they say, well, we just can't be married anymore because we don't work, but we still really love each other. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
That makes zero sense.
it makes no sense.
You don't
at all.
love each other.
Right.
I mean, if
You
you
love
did,
yourself, and you're making a self-interested decision.
correct, correct. And this ties into our previous episode a little bit, or a lot actually, on self-love, and sometimes that piece does drive sentiment
Sure.
on divorce.
Sure.
Well, I can't love myself in this marriage.
Right. Well, and it doesn't make it any easier that pretty much anyone you consult, is going to parrot the same kind of thing, because that's kind of the conventional wisdom of the culture, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think the conventional wisdom, and this goes for almost literally any topic, is you can't tell another person what's right or wrong, what's healthy or unhealthy. Like, it's almost like they have to go through that, and then you can kind of be this bystander that says, yeah, that may not have been a good decision, but they have to kind of, as far as culture is concerned, come to this recollection of come to this idea on their own that, like, oh, maybe divorce isn't healthy. Maybe it's not healthy. But I thought about this normalization that happens with divorce, and it does, and it gets passed down to kids. The fact that you're not divorced.
Sure, I'm statistically an anomaly.
You are.
Yeah.
You're an abnormality.
But I'm also like the only Christian in my family.
Also an abnormality.
Yeah. I think you're onto something there. I mean, typically, not to get too philosophical, but I mean, typically as humans, we accept the reality we're given, right? So if you grow up in an abusive household, you think that's the way you treat people.
That's how you do it.
If you grow up in a household that has, your parents are divorced, you think, well, okay, that's an option. That works.
Mm-hmm.
Now maybe you're really wounded by that. And so you make yourself promises of, like, I'm never going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to do that to my kids or my spouse or whatever. Or maybe you're just like, well, there's always, plan B. I can always get divorced. This doesn't work out. And some of the best advice I got when we went through marriage counseling before we got married, which was kind of a whirlwind because our story is a little unique. I mean, we met in like a church group, a community group, back at Marseille back in the day. And I think we dated for like a month or month and a half, got engaged and got married a month later. And so on our honeymoon, we had known each other for 6 months. And that's not, we're here 14 years later, happily married and everything, but I wouldn't recommend that as,
Sure.
for the masses, but for us, we were older, we were following God, it seemed very clear, like, this is what God wanted us to do, and we rolled with it, But some of the advice we got through our counseling was gold, and it was don't have a plan B.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a plan B, you're that much more likely to take it.
Exactly.
And don't let the D word be in your vocabulary. It doesn't matter how upset you get with your spouse, how much, how angry you get. You never resort to, I'm going to get a divorce, threats, talk about divorce. Like, as long as that plan B is never there, you'll figure out a way to work it out.
And I like that you kind of went there on that one, because some of my on a couple of couples that I've worked with, they, when it comes to the issue of divorce, some of the first counsel I give them at the end of the first counseling session, after I get like the 30,000 foot view of where they're at, is like, okay, so for counseling to work here right now, because I always tell people, like, look, I'm not an advocate for divorce. I understand that it happens, but I'm not an advocate for it. Is you have to be all in to save the marriage, to fix, to reconcile. Yeah. If there's even a 5% of you is in for divorce is likely.
Sure, it's in the back of your head as an option.
Yeah, and so. The plan B, if there is a plan B, and that is divorce, plan A will never actually come to fruition.
Sure.
God gives us the vehicle of marriage to experience a lot of things, joy for one, but refinement also. Mm-hmm. And I do remember as a kid, my parents arguing and fighting a lot. And there was a couple of times where I was like, man, is this the trajectory for divorce? Like slamming doors, being like gunslingers walking through the hallway, not talking to each other for days.
Sure, just immature stuff.
Yeah, and I was like, man, is this what is going to happen? Like, is this like the next week it's going to be divorce? And they never did. Mm-hmm. My parents stayed together, and actually they just celebrated their 40th anniversary.
Nice.
And but I think what that taught me was, one, divorce isn't an option. And that if fighting and disagreement happen in a marriage, it doesn't mean that the marriage is done.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Because we could talk about like how bad divorce is and what do you do when you're in counseling, you know, at the place of getting divorced. But it's much easier. It's much easier to do the proactive things of preventing getting there than it is to like you're there.
Yeah.
And you've got to like fix years of of bitterness and, you know, bad mindset or whatever. I mean, and I think we've kind of talked about it. But I mean, at least for our marriage, the things that have helped and the things I advocate, you know, younger people is like never stop dating your wife.
Mm-hmm.
Always be intentional. Always put your marriage above your parenting. Because if your marriage is good, your parenting is going to reflect that.
Right.
If your parenting's good, that doesn't necessarily affect your marriage.
Right.
And once your kids are grown out of the house and you spend all your time and energy focusing on that, you realize you neglected your marriage and you don't know your. I mean, that's just, there's a reason that. I mean, this is anecdotally. I don't know what the numbers are, but it seems like there's a lot of empty nesters that get to that stage and they're like, I don't know or even like my spouse anymore, and it's because they spent all their time with their life centered around their kids, not centered around the health of their marriage.
Yep, and that kind of gets into a point that, you know, I was going to kind of wrap the episode up on of, you know, relationship and the God that we serve and you know, God that we love and who he is ultimately. But we have, you know, we have divorce being normalized in American culture, and that impacts kids psychologically. You know, like there's all kinds of detriment that divorce does, and no matter how much a parent says, you know, yeah, we're getting divorced, but don't worry, we're still going to show up and love, you know, our kids. Like, the damage is done.
Right.
Like you've just ensured that your kids are going to probably do counseling for a while, and they're going to second guess themselves. It's going to impact the way that they do relationships, friendships. Like,
Sure.
They see mom and dad giving up for whatever reason.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to look at friendships. If friendships don't go well, I can just be done with that.
Yeah.
I can move on.
Right.
And so there is a psychological toll and a deficit that is created in kids and future generations when divorce happens.
Right. Well, and I'd say there's a byproduct of that, and we're seeing that with the younger generations now. Of my parents got divorced. There's a lot of heartache in that. Why even get married?
Right. Yeah.
Or
exactly.
Or why even have kids? Or I want to have kids. I don't want to get married. I'm just going to have a kid.
Right.
You know, and like there's a total. That gets back to like our sex episode. Like there's this total disconnection between sex, marriage, and kids. And God intended them to all be together.
Yeah.
And as a culture, we've separated them and said, no, they're all good by themselves. Do what makes you happy.
Yep.
And in reality, like, we're miserable, and and you know, the anti-depression drugs are like all-time high, and we're like, why is that? That's weird. All right, well, if you do whatever makes you happy, and usually what makes us happy is what's going to destroy us and makes us miserable.
And that's generally the psychological, the common world response to most any issue is, hey, do what makes you happy.
Sure. Which means do what you want.
Yeah, do what you want. You're in control of your life. You're God.
Right.
You know.
You are your highest authority.
Yeah, we don't do very well, like we've said in previous episodes, with being told what to do. Yeah. You know, but we do a fantastic job of making a mess of our lives. So that led me into thinking with the normalization of divorce. Like it's a prevalent topic. It saturates our culture. What's the church's response to this? You know,
I think the church has become pretty complacent on it. You know,
it's pretty varied. I'll say that.
Is it? Okay. I mean, at least in my experience, you know, it seems like. I mean, it seems like, you know, most Bible-believing churches still, it's bad, but they don't really like. It doesn't seem like it's a big deal. It seems like, I mean, from what I've heard, the divorce rate amongst Christians is just as high as non-Christians, which seems troubling to me.
It really is troubling. It really is troubling. You know, just as a cursory glance from my own personal experience with church, is there seems to be kind of two responses, and there might be some nuance to that, but you know, this really firm rigidity You don't divorce whatsoever. You just don't do it. And the only
Caveats.
yeah, I guess caveats. The only exceptions is adultery and abandonment.
Sure.
Right. Anything outside of that, nope.
Which you could make a biblical case for pretty easily.
You could.
But rigidity in general is not. Anyway, yeah.
So you have that response of the rigidity, but I think there's also another response of like extreme permissiveness.
Right. Especially look at the more mainline Protestant denominations,
Yeah,
but you can make the argument that they don't really believe the Bible's authority either. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of altering of Scripture and not being evangelical. Taking God's word as literal and so there really seems to be this pretty strong pendulum swing in the response, and there doesn't seem to be a response on a contextual or an individual basis, and I think that's really, how can the church be an authority on anything if it doesn't have a really thoughtful, compassionate response to these kind of hard issues?
Sure.
In one hand, somebody comes, you're a church leader and somebody says, hey, I'm thinking about divorce. Nope, can't do it. It's a response that lacks any kind of humanity or understanding of the person.
Sure, you just essentially push them away. And,
there's an elevation of theology over the person, which we want to be careful as Christians. We want to have firm theology, but we don't want it to be something that disregards people.
Sure.
Right. But then on the other hand, you have a response. Oh, you want to get divorced? Great, go for it.
Sure.
So you don't have a theology that loves people. You just say, hey, do whatever you want.
Sure. I mean, I like that. I like that you brought up kind of that distinction. What I was thinking, what that made me think about as you're talking is, because this is a dad podcast, bring it back to being a dad. We as parents have to lead and guide our kids, right?
Yeah.
But if we do it with a heavy hand and rigidity, our kids are going to learn, okay, mom and dad aren't safe. I can't go to them with things.
Right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But if you lead with empathy and let me hear where you're at, and hey, that sounds really tough. Let's work through this together, as opposed to just, nope, that's wrong. You screwed up on that. Here's the answer. Like they're going to be very different outcomes. And very different affection levels as far as your kids trusting you with anything.
And especially when you get into especially the teen years, and they start having some more formed thoughts on sex and uses of substances and friendships and relationships. You want to be able to have kind of this relational equity that allows them to come and share their raw thoughts on that sort of stuff, without some sort of fear of reprisal.
Right. Well, and I say that not as someone who's great at it. It's more like
You suck at it too? I suck at it too.
Yeah, I suck at it. It's usually I get done, heated exchange with my son, and I step away and I'm like, shit, I really fucked that up. And then I have to go back and apologize and whatever. And I think that's good as far as the being transparent, both we're talking about divorce, both with when the shit hits the fan and you're not you're being exemplary of Christ to your spouse, and your kid overhears that, not only repenting to your wife but to your kid, bring him in on that, hey son, I said some things that were hurtful and untrue, and I asked for mom's forgiveness, and that's sin. I need Jesus, and demonstrating that, as opposed to maybe what you were alluding to in your experience. It was kind of scary and uncertain because you heard your parents fighting, and that raised this question of am I secure here? My parents going to get divorced? Right. Am I going to be abandoned? Right. But you bring your kids kind of into the mess instead of them wondering, am I safe? Am I secure? Right. But you let them know we're going to make mistakes, but we need to go to Jesus. That is the norm, as opposed to maybe I've heard some kind of conventional wisdom of you just don't let your kids see the raw you. Like you're always setting an example.
Which
And
is some of
so-
the worst advice ever.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's always one of those sounds, right?
Yeah,
In our
we got one.
podcast, there's always somebody blazing down the highway.
Yep.
I think I get the heart of that wisdom, or that piece of wisdom of like, don't ever see your kids, or don't ever let your kids, you know, see you argue or
Right. Or being weak or vulnerable or wrong.
yeah. I mean,
or,
I think I kind of get that. I mean, like if you're a parent that is really toxic in the way that they argue, you know, like you're really demeaning, you're insulting, you know, you are
sure, putting the other person down, calling names.
yeah. I mean,
like,
you're just a complete and utter asshole.
yeah.
You know, then I would say like, yeah, you probably shouldn't show that side of yourself to your kid, you know, because kids are sponges, you know, especially the younger they are, the more they're going to soak in.
Right.
And that old adage, you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree is very, very true.
Mm-hmm.
And kids will, you know, imitate what they see, and parents are their first teachers.
Yeah.
You know, so you have, you know, coming back to the church, you have the church in these two responses, and I'm not saying that the church is failing. There's certainly, you know, work for the church to do, and when I say the church, I mean us, a body of believers.
Sure.
You know, it's not just like leadership's up here. Leadership, you got to figure this out. We're just simply down here.
But Christian, I thought the church was a building that we go to and a service that we attend on
Oh,
Sundays.
my apologies. You're right. No. It took me a long time to figure out what the word Catholic meant, and it's like universal, and the Catholic Church means universal church,
Sure.
and like that's, you know, it's supposed to be the, you know, body of believers and stuff
Sure.
like that.
We
And-
as individuals, Christians, make up the body of Christ, which is the church and the
Right.
bride that Jesus came and died for.
Right, and so when we talk about the church, we're talking about the body and our individual responses that work up to a collective response.
Sure.
You know, and
It's kind of like blaming the culture, but like not seeing the plank in your own eye. Like
Yeah.
you are part of the culture.
yeah,
That's-
your response absolutely has impact here. So one of the issues that I've run into, people can take a very legalistic in the church, legalistic approach when it comes to divorce. I don't want to get divorced because God says divorce is bad. God hates divorce, which is true. The book of Malachi says that, and that's where a lot of people pull, you know, that famous passage, you know, God hates divorce. Yeah, okay, God does hate divorce because God is in community with the rest of the Trinity, you know,
Sure.
the Holy Spirit and Jesus, you know. So God hates divorce. But what's interesting and or really kind of bizarre to me is I've seen relationships, Christian relationships, that say like, no, we don't believe in divorce, but yet their marriage does not imitate anything Christ-like. But they can say that they didn't divorce, and so they stay in a marriage that does not reflect Christ, does not worship Christ. You know, they're mean to each other, they're rude to each other, they're not Christ-like to each other one way. And I'm like, so it's weird. I've had this thought. I don't know that you would necessarily. I'm kind of curious your thoughts on it. Like, what do you think God hates more, like divorce or a marriage that doesn't reflect Him one bit?
I think God hates sin.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Like, basically, people can check the not divorced box.
Yep.
But the rest of their marriage does not reflect Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not good. But I don't think the answer would be, well, you should just get divorced because you guys suck.
Correct.
And you're terrible to each other. You know?
Right.
Yeah, that's my response.
Good. And I think that's a great response. I mean, hey,
course it is.
You're the theology guy, right? I mean, come on.
Everything I say is true.
Basically, that's why I come over here.
I'm also super humble.
You're one of the most humble guys I know. Humblest guys I know. So, I think there are a lot of reasons to why people get divorced.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go into, here's the reasons why you can, here's the reasons why you can't. More, I wanted to bring up this topic to be aware of this a piece, and we have to have some thoughts and opinions on it. But
What?
I don't know. But we, need to understand and know the character of God as it relates to divorce, and especially as we are dads. So God is a relational God. God is a restorative God. God is a redeemer. And I think we need to look, if like we're going to approach the the issue of divorce, we need to understand that about God. Okay, so people do get divorced, but God redeems that. God can redeem that. People get remarried too.
Sure. I mean, just because you sin or get divorced doesn't mean that it's unredeemable. I mean, like, what's the Bible verse talks about, like, what Satan meant for evil, God uses for good. Like,
I think that's in Romans.
Yeah. So
feels like it's Romans.
Yeah. As the theology guy, I'm terrible with finding verses, but I can paraphrase all day.
Sweet.
And I think that's true. I mean, because things happen. People get divorced, but that doesn't mean that's the end of it. Yeah, that's all I got to say. I lost my train of thought. So.
Yeah, no, I
think there's hope there's hope even when we fail.
Yeah, and I think that's if I'm looking at kind of the structure and bones of this conversation, we're looking at look, divorce is a normal thing, or it's become a normalized thing with Christians, non-Christians, and unfortunately, it's become a normalized thing with Christians. Who we're supposed to be, as believers, holy and set apart. Right. We're supposed to be
not like the world.
Yeah. Right. and you see that theme time and again throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's this constant call to be holy and to be, set apart. And so we have that. Sin has helped us normalize this thing. God hates divorce because it's a separation of what He brought together as one, right?
Yep.
And
I don't want.
No. Go ahead. It's a conversation, right?
Okay. Yeah. And I think there's a lot lost in translation as Gentiles, as non-Jewish believers, because we don't fully understand the magnitude of the Old Testament and how it led up to prophesying and the coming of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And part of that is understanding the importance of covenants. Like nowadays, we can
glad you're bringing that up.
Like book smart, we understand. Well, maybe a lot of people don't, but book smart as Christians, we should understand that covenants are different and have a much higher impact than a contract, because socially and legally, marriage has simply become a social contract.
It has,
and Christians accept that, which is a problem because biblically it's a covenant, and if you know anything about covenants. When people had covenants with God or with each other, they had a sacrificial animal. They cut it down the middle, splayed it open, walked it open, basically said, I'm going to abide by this, whether or not you do, whether or not the other party does, and if I don't, you can do this to me.
Right.
That's a pretty big deal.
Really big deal.
That's a really big deal.
And people would work hard to avoid, doing any kind of sin because they know, hey, this is what's on the table.
Right. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, culturally or as Westerners or Gentiles, whatever, we tend to take a much more lackadaisical approach to sin, and don't see it as big of a deal as you kind of call it cheap grace, kind of this well I can sin, or whoops I sinned, well I got Jesus' blood covering it. It's that's if you could stare into the eyes of a holy God, it would terrify us. Yeah. If we understood that our sin that we just kind of dismiss and say, well, it's fine, it's covered by Jesus. What's not fine, Jesus died for it, kind of a big deal. We shouldn't take these things, yeah, it's normalized, people get divorced, whatever. Well, it's not how God sees it,
Yeah, and I'm glad you went there, theology guy. Because I think that's really biblical historical context to understand these sorts of things, and I'm glad you brought up covenant and contract, because covenant says, at least if we look at God's covenant with us, I'm going to love you no matter what.
Right. It doesn't matter if you fail, because you will. versus a contract which is broken as soon as one party doesn't hold up their end of it.
Yeah, and covenant, oftentimes is more based upon like faith than where contract is oftentimes more based on feeling and seeing and touching, and
It's
how
more
many
tangible. I mean, like, it's very specific. Like, if you do this, then this happens.
Yeah, and how many marriages are destroyed because somebody outside of adultery, like, well, they're just not doing it for me anymore.
Sure.
Like I just don't feel in love
Right.
anymore, and it is very contractual.
Sure.
I'm guilty of it. How we approach marriage. It isn't like my love towards my wife does ebb and flow based on what she does.
Well, your affection towards her.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to get into semantics. I mean, our love, should be the action, the selfless servant, action and mindset, but our emotions still get in the way, and our affections will vary.
Yes. Well put. So, I think when it comes to the issue of divorce, it's if you want to change a generation's outlook or future generation's outlook, there needs to be this approach from a covenant stance as opposed to a contractual stance. And I think if you do, you work to chip away at this normalization of divorce. And I think as long as the human species exists, you will have divorce.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. I think that marriage will become a passé thing. I mean, maybe within our lifetime. I mean, considering the trajectory of culture. But as Christians, we need to not take our cues from culture.
Right.
And that gets back to the holiness and being set apart.
Correct.
Which is really tough when you have a culture that is basically intolerant towards faith and believers, and believing in the flying spaghetti monster, which a lot of the world thinks.
Fascinating religion.
We believe as as Christians.
Yeah, and how we're going to approach changing these things apart from shifting our viewpoint to being more covenant as it comes to marriage, is understanding the character of God. Go read the Old Testament. There's so much covenantal language there. See the person and work of Jesus Christ. So much, and that's covenant in action. Yeah. And by doing so, we are impacting the way that we dad on a daily basis.
I like that. Dad is a verb.
Right? We're going to dad today. And that impacts our patience levels, that impacts how we provide, that impacts how we speak with our wives, that impacts how we enjoy things and are content.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that really our motivation for things, we should really break down everything to do I care more about how what God thinks and how he feels about me versus what the world thinks about me? Because I think if you break it down to that, things become much clearer and less complicated.
They do, and that whole idea of head knowledge and heart knowledge, and so I think there are a lot of Christians, me included, that have some good head knowledge.
Well, that's my issue.
Yeah.
I've got all the theology for days, but then I get pissed off and it all goes out the door.
Putting it into practice, applying it, showing, what's that H word I was thinking about earlier today? Humility. That's it. Showing that humility. So, I think this issue of divorce is a relevant topic that many dads are touched by, that impacts their parenting. Now it impacts their patience levels. It impacts, how they're in relationship with their wife, their kids, friends, coworkers. And what we want to seek to try and do on this podcast is encourage a shift in thinking, to be thinking about covenant.
Sure. Well, and know you're not alone in this struggle. I mean, it's hard being married. It's really hard. It's hard being a dad. You're not alone. I mean, reach out to us, and not that we have all the answers, but sometimes it's enough to know that there's others that are going through the same stuff, have the same struggles.
Everybody has a narrative. Everybody has a story, and divorce, as difficult as it is, and as there is shame that comes from it and brokenness that comes from it. It does not have to be the final say.
Yeah, it doesn't have to define you.
Right, and so that's why we have just a wonderful, beautiful God in Jesus Christ who gives us this, reminds us and gives us a new identity, and something that will transcend anything that divorce, depression, anxiety, a whole host of other things that seek to define us. That Jesus Christ transcends all of that, and so I'm hopeful that anybody listening to this podcast on this episode can find some hope that Jesus Christ can transcend the impacts, the effects, the cultural narrative of divorce. So, I don't know. Did we touch on some stuff today?
Yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up. I mean, if you had any questions about divorce, we had all the answers. So if you were thinking about getting divorced, just nix that off.
Yeah, don't do
fire
it.
your lawyer. Go buy your wife some flowers.
We're gonna save you about 10 to 15 grand in custody disputes.
Yeah. Hopefully it is an encouraging discussion. I mean, I think there's very few of us who, either personally or with immediate family, haven't been touched by divorce. So it's unfortunately too common.
Well, dads, we love you as always, and we appreciate any and all of you that listen. And if you know anybody that would benefit from listening to this podcast, please do help us spread the word. As we want people to know Jesus Christ. We want people to know the power of Christ and the saving grace that He offers and the redemption that awaits. And so please reach out to us, Instagram, Facebook, and
soon YouTube.
Soon YouTube. We have yet to delve into that, but that is probably forthcoming. But please do reach out to us. We love connecting with you. Thank you for those that have connected with us. And keep moving forward and keep your eyes on Christ, dads.